They laughed at her, said a woman had no place behind a sniper's scope. In Rockford, she was just the quiet girl who came home from the Navy too soon. But when armed men came for her town, she didn't run. She didn't hide. In 5 minutes, 12 enemies fell, and the ones who doubted her, they never doubted again. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a story like this. Now, let's see how a quiet, underestimated woman from Rockford became the town's unexpected hero. The rain had just stopped in the small town of Rockford, Virginia, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. The streets were quiet, except for the low hum of a diner's neon sign flickering on the corner. Inside, a small group of men in dusty work boots sat around the counter, sipping coffee and trading stories about deer hunting, truck repairs, and Friday night football at a corner booth. A woman sat alone, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid that ran down the back of her. Sweatshirt. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a plain gray hoodie and jeans. Her name was Emily Carter, and though she looked like any other quiet local, she wasn't here to make friends. She was here because she had come home, reluctantly. Emily had been a Navy SEAL sniper for 8 years. The first woman in her unit. The one who had been told, "It can't be done," more times than she could count. But that was the thing about Emily. She never measured her worth by what others thought possible. She measured it by what needed to be done. She had left the service a few months ago, after a classified mission in the Middle East had gone wrong. The official story was that the team had been ambushed. 2 men dead, 1 wounded. Mission aborted. But Emily knew the truth, and the truth wasn't something the Navy wanted her talking about. Now she was back in Rockford, the place she had grown up in, the place she had once sworn she'd never return to. Her mother had passed 2 years earlier. Her father had moved to a retirement community in Florida. Emily's childhood home was empty and dusty, its creaky floors echoing every step. She had no job, no husband, no kids, just a military pension and a mind that wouldn't stop replaying the worst 5 minutes of her career. Across the diner, a group of men in their 40s glanced at her and started whispering. Emily didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. She had grown up with these same types, the ones who believed women belonged in kitchens, not on battlefields. One of them, a tall man in a trucker hat, finally said it loud enough for her to hear. "So that's the famous sniper, huh?" "Bet. She's more dangerous with a spatula than a rifle." Laughter rippled through the group. Emily didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her coffee, but inside she felt that familiar burn, the one she had felt at boot camp, during training, and in the sandstorms overseas. When her male teammates doubted her. Another man chimed in. 12 years in the Navy and she's back here sitting in a booth like the rest of us. Guess the war's over for you, sweetheart. Emily set down her cup. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened. She could have walked out. She could have ignored them. But part of her had learned that sometimes silence only feeds ignorance. She stood slowly, her boots clicking against the diner's floor. When she reached their table, she looked each man in the eye. "You think you know what dangerous looks like," she said evenly. "You don't." The tall man smirked. "Oh, we know enough." Emily leaned in just slightly. "I've spent nights so still that the only thing I heard was my own heartbeat. I've stared through a scope at people who didn't know I was there until it was too late. And I've done it so that you could sit here, run your mouths, and laugh at someone you'll never understand." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the smirk returned. "Guess that's a nice bedtime story, but we all know they gave you a rifle for the photo ops." The laughter came again, but quieter this time. Emily turned away, went back to her booth, and paid her bill. She didn't bother saying anything else, because nothing she could say would change small-town minds overnight. She had learned long ago that respect isn't given. It's taken. That night, she walked home under the dim glow of street lamps. The rain starting again in a thin drizzle. Her thoughts kept drifting to the mission that had ended her career, the one that still haunted her. And somewhere, deep inside, she felt the faint stirring of something she thought she had buried. The readiness to fight again. She just didn't know yet that the fight would come to her doorstep sooner than she imagined. 2 weeks passed. Emily kept to herself, fixing up her mother's old house, running along the back roads at dawn, and shooting at the abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a proper range, but it was far enough from houses that the sound of gunfire didn't bring the sheriff running. She used her old bolt-action rifle, not the military-issue sniper she'd turned in, but a personal Remington she'd owned for years. She cleaned it after every session, not because it needed it, but because it gave her hands something to do. The mornings in Rockford were quiet, the kind of quiet that could lull a person into thinking nothing bad ever happened here. But Emily knew better. Bad things didn't just happen in deserts and war zones. They could happen anywhere, and they did. One evening, just after sunset, she was walking back from the grocery store when she heard sirens wailing toward the north end of town. 2 sheriff's SUVs tore past her, lights flashing. Rockford wasn't big enough for that kind of commotion without the whole place knowing in minutes. By the time Emily reached home, her neighbor, Helen, was already on her porch with a cigarette. Helen was in her 60s, wiry, with hair dyed a shade of red that didn't occur in nature. She nodded at Emily. "You hear? Armed robbery at the gas station by the interstate. 3 men, masks, got away with cash and scared the daylights out of the clerk." Emily put her bag on the porch. "They catch them?" Helen shook her head. "Nope. They headed toward the old mill road. That's your side of town." Emily didn't flinch, but she noticed the way Helen was looking at her, like she was, wondering if the sniper in their midst was going to do something about it. That night, Emily sat in the living room, the lights off, just listening. Old habits die hard. She could hear every creak of the house, every car that passed in the distance. Around midnight, she caught something new, the faint crunch of gravel outside, slow and deliberate. She moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. A dark SUV rolled past, no headlights, moving almost in a crawl. 2 silhouettes in the front. She memorized the shape of the vehicle instantly. The SUV didn't stop, but the unease it left behind stayed with her until morning. The next day, she went into town to buy more ammunition. Rockford's only gun shop was run by Rick Thompson, a stocky man in his 50s who had known Emily since she was a teenager. He raised an eyebrow when she walked in. "Stocking up for hunting season?" he asked. "Something like that," Emily said. Rick leaned on the counter. "You hear about that robbery? Sheriff says those boys are military trained. Not some random punks." Emily stopped loading boxes into her basket. "How does he know?" "Clerk said one of them handled the shotgun like he'd been drilled on it, and they moved like a unit. In and out in 90 seconds. Emily paid without another. Word. On the walk home, she kept running the details through her head. Military-trained criminals operating in a town like Rockford didn't happen by accident. They were here for a reason. 2 nights later, the reason came to her front yard. She woke at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of boots on the porch, quiet, controlled, not the clumsy shuffle of a drunk or a kid. This was tactical. Emily slid from bed, grabbed the Remington from its case, and chambered around. She moved to the side of the window, staying in the shadows. Through the thin crack in the curtain, she saw them. 2 men, masks on, one with a suppressed pistol, the other carrying a short-barreled rifle. They weren't knocking. They were checking her door. Emily's pulse stayed steady. Her training took over. She eased the safety off. The man with the pistol tested the door handle. The other scanned the yard. And then, without a word, they moved off the porch and melted. Back into the dark. Emily didn't follow. She stayed frozen in place until their footsteps were gone. Then she picked up her phone and called the sheriff. But as soon as she said who she was, she heard it in his tone. Disbelief. "Emily, I'll send someone by in the morning, but if you didn't see their faces, there's not much I can do." She hung up without thanking him. By dawn, Emily knew two things for certain. One, whoever those men were, they weren't done. Two, when they came back, she'd be ready. By the next afternoon, Emily had barely slept. She moved through her kitchen with the precision of someone running on instinct rather than energy. Coffee. Check the locks. Scan the road outside. Repeat. The sheriff had sent a deputy around mid-morning, but it was mostly for show. The man stood on her porch, scribbled a few notes, and glanced at her rifle case like it was the most interesting thing in the world. His questions were shallow, his tone dismissive. "So, you're saying two masked men just walked up, rattled the door, and left? Didn't say anything? Didn't take anything?" "That's right," Emily replied. "Could have been kids." "Kids don't move like that," she said flatly. The deputy made a vague promise to keep an eye out before driving off. Emily knew the truth. They weren't going to take her seriously until something happened. By then, it would be too late. She decided to make her own preparations. That afternoon, she drove to the quarry. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wet stone. She set up her usual targets, steel plates at 50, 100, and 200 yards. But today, she went further. She positioned small soda cans at awkward angles, half hidden behind rocks. She practiced on them until she could drop each one without missing a beat. Emily wasn't training for a pretty grouping on paper. She was training for movement, for unpredictability, for a fight where the targets didn't stand still. On her way back into town, she stopped at Helen's porch. The older woman was shelling peas in a plastic bowl, a cigarette balanced on the edge of the railing. "You're up early for once," Helen said with a smirk. "I need to ask you something," Emily said. "Have you noticed any strange cars? At night? SUVs? Trucks with blacked-out plates?" Helen squinted, saw a dark SUV last night, slow rolling down toward the mill. Thought it was just some kids looking for a place to drink. "It wasn't." Helen's hands paused over the bowl. "You're saying?" "I'm saying you should keep your doors locked, and if you see it again, don't go outside. Call me." Helen gave a short laugh. "Call you? You're not the sheriff." "No," Emily said, "but I'll answer." That night, Emily sat in the dark again, rifle across her lap, every light in the house off. The quiet in Rockford was deceptive, like a lake so still you couldn't see the current underneath. At 1:07 a.m., her phone buzzed. A single text from Helen. SUV, heading south. No lights. Emily was already moving. She slid into her boots, grabbed her go bag, and slipped out the back door. The cool night air hit her face as she crossed her yard and climbed the low ridge behind her house. From up there, she could see the county road. The SUV appeared. Same shape, same slow crawl. This time she counted 3 silhouettes inside. Emily tracked them through the dark, staying low, until they turned down a narrow dirt road toward the old textile mill. The mill had been shut down for years, the windows busted out, the roof sagging. Kids went there to drink and spray paint the walls, but nobody went at night unless they had a reason. Emily crept closer, keeping to the trees. From the edge of the lot, she watched the men unload crates from the SUV. The sound carried, metallic. Clinks, the dull thud of heavy boxes hitting the ground. One of the crates split slightly in the corner, and even from 20 yards, she could see the dull black shine of rifles stacked inside. Not hunting rifles. Military grade. Her breath stayed steady, but her mind was already cataloging everything. Number of men, number of weapons, the order in which they moved. This wasn't a one-time robbery crew. This was something bigger, and they were setting up shop right here in Rockford. She backed away without making a sound. By the time she reached home, the clock read 3:22 a.m. She didn't call the sheriff. She knew how that would go. Instead, she started making a list, not of weapons, not of supplies, but of people, who she could trust, who she couldn't, who was likely to believe her, and who would only believe when it was too late. She didn't know yet that the too late moment was less than a week away. By the fourth night of watching the mill, Emily's routine had become clockwork. Sleep in short bursts, check the ridge, track the SUV, note the changes. But on the fifth night, the changes weren't small. There were more men, more crates, more movement. From her vantage point, she counted 6 armed men unloading what looked like tactical vests, ammunition belts, and sealed metal cases she recognized instantly. Explosives, military grade, controlled items. Not something you bought at a gun show. She could feel the weight of what this meant. This wasn't just a stash for some quick robberies. This was staging. Preparing. The next morning, Emily went into town with the intent of forcing the sheriff to take action. The man himself was in his small wood-paneled office, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. Sheriff Marks. Emily began, "I've been tracking the men from that gas station robbery. They're based at the old textile mill. They've got weapons, explosives, and there are more of them now." He blinked at her, set his mug down, and leaned back in his chair. "You've been tracking them?" "Yes, I've got times, numbers, descriptions. You need to move on them now before someone gets killed. Emily, you realize you're talking about armed intervention based on you skulking around the woods with binoculars." She felt her jaw tighten. "You think I don't know what I'm seeing? I've been trained to identify threats like this. These men aren't locals. They're organized, and they're gearing up for something big." The sheriff gave a tired sigh. "Look, I appreciate your service, I do. But I can't just roll up on some old mill because you say so. I need probable cause. And when they hit something in this town, you'll have all the cause you need, and a body count." The conversation ended the way Emily knew it would, with a polite dismissal and a warning not to get involved. By the time she stepped out into the sunlight, the decision was made for her. If no one else was going to stop them, she would. 2 days later, the first public sign appeared. It was a Saturday morning when the Rockford Farmers Market was in full swing. Kids chasing each other between stalls. Old men selling homemade jerky. The smell of cinnamon rolls in the air. Emily was walking back to her truck when she noticed the sound first, the low growl of multiple engines. 3 vehicles, 2 SUVs and a van, rolled down Main Street at a slow, deliberate pace. They didn't have markings. Their windows were tinted. But what caught her attention was the way they stopped, perfectly in sync, flanking the road like a blockade. The side doors of the van slid open, and 3 men in tactical gear stepped out. Not masks this time, but sunglasses and hats pulled low. Their weapons were concealed, but Emily caught the bulge of holsters under their jackets. They didn't say a word. They just walked through the market, eyes scanning. And every so often, one of them would stop, pull out a phone, and take a casual photo of a stall or a face. Emily stayed still, leaning against her truck, eyes tracking every step. The locals noticed, too, but they didn't see what she saw. They saw strangers passing through, maybe buyers from out of town. Not recon. Not a dry run. When the vehicles finally pulled away, Emily's gut told her the countdown had started. That night, she was back on the ridge when the mill came alive. Not just the usual unloading. This time, there were maps laid out on a table. Men pointing, one holding up what looked like a printout of the farmer's market layout. Emily's stomach turned. She didn't need the details. She knew the playbook: create chaos, lock down an area, make a statement dot, and in a town like Rockford, the sheriff's department didn't have the manpower to handle even 2 armed attackers, let alone a squad. Slid back down the ridge and into her house, her mind already racing through plans. If this was going to happen, she couldn't just be a witness. She was going to have to stop it dot, and when she stopped it, she'd make sure no one in Rockford ever laughed at her again. The night air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the overhead light dim, the rest of the house in darkness. Her Remington rifle was stripped down to its pieces on a towel in front of her. Bolt, barrel, stock, each part cleaned and checked with quiet precision. She had already been over it twice. Not because it needed it, but because her hands needed the work. It kept her from staring at the clock, kept her from thinking about the fact that tomorrow might be the day she had to use it again, for real. A small radio played softly in the background, tuned to the local station. The evening DJ was rambling about the county fair next month, the high school football scores, and the weather. Nothing about danger. Nothing about armed men planning an assault in their backyard. Emily glanced at the phone on the counter. She could call the sheriff again, tell him everything she saw at the mill last night. But the result would be the same. A polite nod, a skeptical smile, and a note scribbled in a file. That would mean nothing when it all went down. She picked up the rifle's stock and began reassembling the weapon. The motions were muscle memory, each click and turn as natural as breathing. When it was finished, she laid the rifle in its case and zipped it halfway, ready to go. Before bed, she walked the perimeter of the property. The moon was bright enough to make out the tree line, the fence, the gravel drive that led to the road. She checked the locks on every door and window. On the porch, she paused. From here, she could see the ridge, dark and still against the sky. Somewhere beyond it, the men at the mill were making their own preparations. She wondered if they knew someone was watching. She wondered if they cared dot by the time she lay down. She'd already run through the next day 12 times in her mind. Where she'd position herself, how she'd track them, how she'd take the first shot if it came to that dot. Sleep came late, and it was shallow dot. She woke before dawn to the sound of a text buzzing her phone. The sender was Helen. Market moved to Sue. Sunday this week. Big crowd expected dot. Emily sat up, her heart sinking. The farmer's market was usually on Saturday, but with tomorrow's perfect weather forecast, they'd pushed it to Sunday to pull in more traffic. That meant more people. More potential victims. It also meant the men at the mill probably knew the same thing. She spent the morning in quiet motion, packing a small bag with water, extra ammo, binoculars, and a first aid kit. She kept her clothes plain and dark. Jeans, a black long-sleeve shirt, boots with soft soles. Nothing that would draw attention. Around noon, she drove out past the edge of town, taking the back roads that curved toward the ridge. She parked her truck half a mile from the quarry and continued on foot, staying low, keeping to the brush. From her vantage point at the ridge, she saw them. The SUVs were lined up outside the mill, doors open, men loading weapons and gear. They moved with purpose. No wasted motion. Emily's breathing slowed. This was it. They were going to move soon. She slipped back to her truck, parked it near the far end of Main Street, away from the market, but close enough that she could get to a high vantage point quickly. Then she walked, blending into the Saturday afternoon. Crowd like any other local running errands. Inside, Her senses were razor-sharp. She caught the hum of an engine from 2 blocks away, the metallic click of someone setting down a ladder, the faint smell of gasoline in the air. By late afternoon, the town was settling down for the evening. The market tents were already being set up for tomorrow. Kids played in the street under the lazy glow of street lamps. Somewhere beyond the trees, engines started. Emily knew the next 24 hours would change everything for her, for Rockford, and for the men who thought they could roll into this town without consequences. And when it came, she'd be ready. Sunday morning dawned bright and calm, the kind of day Rockford prided itself on. The farmers' market was already in full swing by 9. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted through the air. Laughter, conversations, the clink of coins. At cash boxes, it was the sound of a place that thought it was safe. Emily wasn't browsing the stalls. She was watching. She moved along the market's outer edge, sunglasses hiding her eyes as she scanned for anything out of place. A parked car that didn't belong. A man whose gaze lingered too long. A shift in the background noise. By 9:17, she saw it. The same dark SUVs she'd tracked all week, rolling slow down Main Street. They didn't stop this time. They passed once, circled the block, and came back. Emily slipped into the narrow alley between the bakery and the old post office. From there, she had a clear line to her truck, parked 100 yards away. Her rifle was inside, hidden under a folded blanket. When the SUVs came back a third time, Van was with them. It stopped halfway down the block. The side doors slid open. It began. 3 men stepped out in tactical gear, rifles visible now. They didn't shout warnings. They didn't fire into the air. They just raised their weapons and started moving. Toward the market, Emily's feet were already moving. She sprinted to the truck, yanked open the door, and pulled the rifle free. Her heart rate didn't spike. Her training kicked in. Breathe. Focus. She dropped to one knee beside the truck, racked the bolt, and found her first target, the lead man moving toward the produce stand. He had the stance of someone who'd fired under pressure before. Exhale. Squeezed. The shot cracked through the morning air. He went down hard. 2 more men spun, scanning rooftops and windows, not realizing she was low, ground level. She shifted, sighted on the second, the one reaching for a grenade at his belt. Second shot. He folded backward. A scream rose from the market. People scattered, tipping tables, grabbing kids, diving for cover. Emily moved along the side of her. Truck found the third man, crouching now, firing into the crowd. She took him in the shoulder, then the head before he could recover. That was 3. The van's driver ducked behind the open door, firing wildly. She dropped him with a clean shot through the arm into the chest. 4. From the corner of her eye, she caught motion, one of the SUV teams flanking toward the alley she'd just used. She pivoted, fired, dropped one, and the other as they tried to drag him out of the line of fire. 6. Her hands moved without thinking, bolt back. New round-chambered. The last SUV screeched to a halt near the corner. 2 more men jumped out, one with a shotgun, the other with a scoped rifle. She took the shotgun man first, a moving target at 70 yards. 7. The rifleman spotted her and dropped prone in the street, firing. A round slammed into her truck's fender inches from her knee. Emily shifted position, sliding behind the wheel well, waited for his second shot, then took him through the scope. 8. Her ears were ringing now, not from fear, but from focus. She knew she had seconds before more arrived. Another man appeared, from behind the van, dragging a child by the arm, using her as a shield. Emily steadied, aimed just high enough, and took him in the temple. The child broke free and ran. The next was blind luck, one of the original attackers still crawling for his dropped rifle. She didn't give him the chance. 10.2 more emerged from the alley across the street, one tossing a smoke grenade. The cloud began to spread, but Emily already had them marked. 11, 12, 5 minutes had passed. The gunfire stopped. The only sounds left were screams fading into sobs, and the far-off wail of sirens that had finally begun moving toward Main Street. Emily lowered her rifle. Her breath was steady. Her hands didn't shake. She had done exactly what needed to be done. The sirens grew louder, echoing off the brick storefronts. Sheriff Mark's cruiser was the first to arrive, followed by 2 deputies. They screeched to a halt halfway down Main Street, doors flying open, weapons drawn, far too late to stop. Anything. Emily stood beside her truck, rifle slung over her shoulder. She didn't raise her hands, didn't move toward them. She just waited. The sheriff's eyes swept the scene, the bodies, the scattered weapons, the overturned market stalls. What in the hell? His voice trailed off. One deputy ran to check on the injured. Another tried to corral the few people still in shock and keep them from stepping into the street. Marks approached Emily cautiously. You did this? They were going to hit the market. Hard, she said flatly. His jaw tightened. I told you not to get involved. If I hadn't, you'd be counting bodies right now. They stared at each other for a long moment. Marks broke first, looking away toward the scene. He didn't thank her. He didn't apologize. He just barked orders at his deputies to start collecting weapons and securing the area. By noon, the street was cordoned off with yellow tape. State police had rolled in, along with men in plain clothes who didn't wear badges but moved with authority. They questioned everyone, vendors, shoppers, and finally, Emily. She told them what she'd seen at the mill, what she'd tracked all week, how she'd recognized the recon run at yesterday's market. She described the gear, the crates, the maps. One of the plainclothes men scribbled in a notebook, then exchanged a glance with his partner. We've been tracking a group like this in 3 states, he said quietly. Didn't think they'd hit a place like this. They almost did, Emily replied. By evening, the market was gone. Only a few broken tables and torn awnings remained. The people of Rockford were holed up in their homes, watching the news. The story was already spreading. Attempted armed attack foiled in small Virginia town. The footage showed aerial shots of Main Street, blurred images of bodies under sheets. They didn't show Emily. She had no interest in being on camera. Still, word spread. By the time she stopped at the diner that night for coffee, the whispers weren't mocking anymore. Heads turned when she walked in, not in ridicule, but in something closer to respect. Helen was there, sitting at the counter, and for once she didn't smirk. She just nodded. Heard you saved a few lives today. Emily sipped her coffee. Not just me. People got out of the way fast. That helped. Helen's gaze was steady. Don't sell yourself short. This town didn't believe you. I didn't believe you. We all owe you. Emily didn't reply. She wasn't in it for thanks. But that night, as she sat on her porch with the cool air settling over Rockford, she couldn't shake one thought. The mill was still there. And if these men were part of the bigger network, more would come. She had defended the market. She had defended her town, but the fight wasn't over. The day after the market attack, Rockford tried to return to normal. Kids went back to school. The diner opened its doors again. But there was a heaviness in the air, the kind that lingers when people realize their small town isn't untouchable. Emily didn't feel normal. Not yet. She had replayed the firefight in her mind, not with regret, but with a soldier's precision, checking for mistakes, vulnerabilities, moments that could have gone differently. The conclusion was always the same. She'd acted exactly as she should have. And yet, There was an itch under her skin. The mill. Sheriff Marks hadn't put any guards on it. State police had promised to secure the site, but Emily knew how bureaucracy worked. Paperwork first, action later. That left a window of opportunity. At dusk, she loaded her truck. The rifle went in the passenger seat, the same go bag. From before in the back. She drove the long way around town, avoiding Main Street, and parked a quarter-mile from the ridge. The rest she covered on foot. Boots silent on the damp ground. From the ridge, she scanned the mill with her binoculars. The SUVs were gone. The front doors stood open. But there, faint movement inside. 2 figures, not wearing the same gear as before, moving through the shadows. Emily's gut tightened. Clean-up crew. She made her way down the slope, circling. To the rear of the building. A broken loading dock offered a quiet entry. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. She followed the sound of low voices until she reached the main floor. 2 men were there, packing crates into a smaller truck. She caught fragments of their conversation. Rest of the shipment, get it to D.C., nobody knows. Her pulse stayed steady. This was no random band of thugs. This was organized, and the attack on Rockford had been one small piece of something bigger. Emily stepped into the open, rifle at the ready, trucks not going anywhere. The men froze. One dropped the crate. The other's hand twitched toward a sidearm. "Don't," she said quietly. The first man tried to talk. "Lady, you don't understand. I understand enough. You're going to drop your weapons, step away from the truck, and tell me who sent you." Neither moved. The second man's hand twitched again, and that was all it took. Emily's shot echoed through the hollow mill. He went down instantly. The first man dropped his pistol. Okay. It's not local. Orders came from higher up. The market was just a test run. We've got 5 more towns lined up. Not anymore, she said. She zip-tied his wrists with a length of cord from her bag, hauled him outside, and left him kneeling beside the truck. Then she stepped back into the mill. There was 1 crate, left open on the floor. Inside, under a tarp, she found more rifles, stacks of ammunition, and a folder of maps marked with red X's across 3 states. Emily photographed everything, then walked back to the truck where the prisoner sat, shaking. "You're going to wait right here," she said, "and the sheriff's going to pick you up. You're going to tell him the same thing you just told me. And if you lie, I'll know." By the time she returned to her truck, the sun was gone, and the ridge was bathed in silver moonlight. The next morning, Sheriff Marks came to her porch. He didn't sit. He didn't fidget. He just stood there, hat in hand. "You were right," he said simply. Emily nodded. "I usually am." He managed the faintest smile. "Town's safe because of you. That's not something we forget." She didn't say anything. Respect wasn't why she'd done it. But as she watched him walk away, she realized something. The doubt in his eyes was gone. Rockford might never see her as just another local again. And that was fine, because now they knew exactly what she was capable of. And so did anyone else who might come looking for trouble.